Throughout history, humans believed they had conquered the land. They cut through forests, redirected rivers, climbed mountains. But there was always one place where human control was never complete: the desert. Deserts are not just sand and heat. They are archives of time. They appear empty and lifeless, yet they have witnessed some of the most important moments in human history. Long before empires rose, before borders were drawn, the deserts were already ancient. Kings crossed them, merchants crossed them, pilgrims, armies, and explorers followed, and many of them never returned. Deserts have always had two faces in history. On one side, they connected the world. Trade routes cut through hostile landscapes, allowing silk, gold, salt, and ideas to move between distant civilizations. Entire economies depended on these journeys. Religions spread through them. Cultures met because caravans dared to cross the sands. Without deserts, much of human history would never have been connected. But the other face of the desert was merciless. One wrong decision, one missed water source, one false belief, and the desert erased everything. Not with violence, not with noise, but with silence. What makes deserts truly frightening is how little evidence they leave behind. Cities disappeared beneath sand. Routes shifted. Footprints vanished overnight. Unlike ruins or battlefields, deserts do not preserve memory. They remove it. And yet deserts were not always this way. Many of today's great deserts were once green landscapes. Rivers flowed where dunes now stand. People lived where no life exists today. Climate changed, water vanished, and history moved on. But the desert remained. This story is not about sand. It is about people, about choices made under pressure, about journeys that shaped the world and others that ended in silence. Because deserts are not just geography, they are a test. And throughout history, not everyone passed it. Caravans were not built on compassion. They were built on calculation. How much water remained, how far the next oasis was, how long the animals could endure the heat. In the desert, every decision was measured, because one mistake could kill everyone. For this reason, illness and weakness were never private problems. They were collective threats. No one planned to fall sick, but long desert journeys made sickness inevitable. Dehydration, infections, open wounds, heat exhaustion. When one person slowed down, the entire caravan slowed with them. And in the desert, slowing down often meant death. At first, help was given. The sick were given more water. They were placed on camels instead of walking. Stops were extended. But this mercy had limits. Every extra stop consumed water. Every delay increased risk. Every act of help shortened survival time for the group. Eventually, a moment arrived that no one spoke about openly. If the sick person could no longer walk, could no longer ride, and showed no signs of recovery, the caravan leader had to decide. Historical sources rarely describe this directly, but between the lines, the truth is clear. The sick and the weak were sometimes left behind, not as punishment, not out of cruelty, but because the alternative was the death of everyone. In the desert, choices were not between good and evil. They were between death and death delayed. Sometimes those left behind were given water, a small supply of food, directions toward a distant oasis. But everyone understood what this meant. Alone in the desert, hope was thin. Most who were abandoned disappeared without record. No grave, no witness, just silence. The most disturbing part was how quietly these decisions were made. There were no arguments, no shouting, just eye contact, long pauses, and then the caravan moving forward. The one left behind rarely protested, because they understood the truth as well. If everyone stayed, everyone would die. Some caravans operated under even harsher rules. From the beginning, it was understood who would be sacrificed first: the elderly, the severely wounded, sometimes even children. These realities appear only faintly in historical texts because they do not fit heroic narratives. History prefers victory, not survival at any cost. It would be wrong to say caravans did not value human life. But in the desert, life was not individual. It was shared. One person's weakness could end every life in the group. And so the harshest decisions were often considered the most rational. Today, these stories shock us. But centuries ago, they were rules of survival. Caravans were governed not by mercy, but by reality. And that reality was unforgiving. Before satellites, before compasses, before maps with coordinates, humans crossed the most hostile landscapes on Earth with nothing but observation, memory, and knowledge passed down through generations. Nowhere was this more extraordinary than in the desert, in a place where everything looks the same, where landmarks vanish overnight, and where one wrong turn can mean death. People still found their way, not by technology, but by understanding the land. The sky was their first map. At night, desert travelers navigated by stars. They memorized constellations. They learned how certain stars rose and set in fixed patterns. They used the position of the North Star to maintain direction across featureless terrain. The desert sky became a moving compass, and the stars became roads. By day, the sun replaced the stars. Travelers observed the sun's arc across the sky, its angle, its shadow patterns. They learned how shadows shifted on rocks, on sticks, on their own bodies. Time itself became a navigation tool. The sand was not random. Experienced guides read dunes the way sailors read waves. Wind shaped the desert in patterns. Dunes formed ridges. Slopes faced predictable directions. Certain winds carved certain angles. To outsiders, the desert looked chaotic. To trained eyes, it had structure. Wind was a guide. The direction of prevailing winds created long-term patterns in the sand. By studying erosion, dust trails, and dune alignment, guides could maintain orientation even without visible landmarks. Memory was the most powerful tool of all. Routes were not drawn, they were remembered. Guides memorized. Rock formations, unusual hills, tree shapes, soil colors, the smell of certain areas, the sound of wind between stones. The desert became a living map. Navigation was not individual, it was collective knowledge. Skills were passed from elder to apprentice, from father to son, from guide to guide. Mistakes were remembered longer than successes. Survival knowledge became tradition. Animals were also teachers. Travelers observed how birds flew, how camels behaved, where insects gathered. Life always moved toward water. If something lived there, water was near. Sound mattered. In silence, experienced travelers could hear distant winds, shifting sands, changes in air movement. The desert spoke quietly. Only those who listened understood it. Travelers also used time memory. They knew how long a route took on foot, on camel, at night, in heat. Distance was measured not in kilometers, but in days, water rations, and endurance. Desert navigation was not precision. It was probability. It was reading patterns, interpreting signs, making decisions with incomplete information. And somehow it worked. This is why experienced desert guides were priceless. Not because they knew one route, but because they understood the desert itself. They didn't follow maps. They followed systems. Without GPS, without compasses, without satellites, people crossed thousands of kilometers of emptiness using knowledge, memory, stars, wind, and instinct. Not technology, understanding. Throughout history, humans crossed oceans, climbed mountains, and cut paths through forests. But there was one landscape where strength, courage, and intelligence alone were never enough, because deserts were not simply empty spaces of sand and heat, but environments that demanded a complete rethinking of how humans moved, survived, and connected with one another. For thousands of years, deserts stood as natural barriers, separating civilizations rather than linking them, turning vast regions of the world into isolated pockets of human life, until one animal fundamentally changed the relationship between humanity and the desert, the camel. Without camels, crossing the desert was not merely dangerous, it was almost impossible, because no human could carry enough water for days of travel, endure extreme heat during daylight and freezing temperatures at night, and still transport food, tools, and trade goods across hundreds of kilometers of barren land. The camel transformed this impossibility into routine survival, not because it was strong alone, but because it was perfectly adapted to the desert in ways no human could ever be, capable of going days without water, storing energy in fat rather than muscle, walking across loose sand without sinking, and enduring conditions that would quickly destroy both people and other animals. Before camels were domesticated, Deserts were feared and avoided whenever possible, crossed only in short, desperate stretches that often ended in death. But once camels became part of human travel, deserts ceased to be walls and instead became corridors through which trade, culture, and history itself could flow. Entire trade networks emerged only because camels made them viable, allowing silk, gold, salt, spices, manuscripts, and ideas to move across regions that had once been unreachable, meaning that the spread of religions, technologies, and cultures depended not on roads or ships, but on caravans moving steadily through sand. Cities rose in places that would otherwise have been uninhabitable. Caravan hubs flourished in the middle of hostile landscapes, and empires grew wealthy not because they conquered deserts, but because they learned how to move through them with the help of camels. In desert caravans, distance was no longer measured in kilometers or miles, but in water rations, endurance, and the ability of camels to carry life itself across emptiness, making the animal not just a means of transport, but the central pillar around which every journey was planned. If a camel collapsed, the journey collapsed with it, because a single lost animal could mean the loss of water, food, trade goods, and ultimately lives, which is why in desert societies, camels were often more valuable than gold, more protected than people, and more carefully managed than weapons. Control over camels meant control over trade, because whoever owned large herds could move farther, faster and safer than their rivals, turning camels into instruments of economic power and political influence that shaped the balance of entire regions. Even desert warfare depended on camels, since armies could not survive without supply lines. And in the desert, those supply lines existed only as long as camels carried water, weapons, and food across hostile terrain, meaning that without camels, large-scale military campaigns in desert regions would have been unthinkable. Yet despite their central role, camels rarely appear as heroes in historical narratives, because history tends to focus on kings, generals, and empires, while overlooking the silent forces that made their actions possible in the first place. The truth is that camels did not help humans conquer the desert, because the desert was never conquered. Instead, camels allowed humans to adapt, to cooperate with nature rather than attempt to dominate it, forming one of the most successful partnerships between humans and animals in history. Rather than forcing the desert to change, humans changed themselves by relying on an animal that understood the desert better than they ever could, proving that survival in extreme environments often depends not on strength or technology, but on choosing the right ally. When we look back at history today, it becomes clear that without camels, deserts would have remained vast, impassable voids that separated civilizations instead of connecting them, preventing trade routes from forming, cities from rising, and cultures from ever meeting. In that sense, the camel was not merely an animal of the desert, but a key that unlocked entire regions of the world, shaping the flow of history in ways that are still felt today. Without camels, the desert would not just have been empty land. It would have been a permanent boundary that human civilization could never cross. During the day, the desert looks honest, harsh but visible, cruel but understandable, because the sun reveals everything at once: the dunes, the heat, the distance, the danger, and the traveler can at least see what threatens them, even if they cannot defeat it. But when night falls, the desert changes its nature. It does not become louder, it becomes quieter. And that silence is what terrifies the human mind. At night, the desert offers no familiar reference points, no walls, no trees, no shadows that feel safe, only darkness stretching in every direction, making it impossible to tell whether you are standing still or slowly being swallowed by space itself. In cities, darkness hides things. In forests, darkness conceals movement. But in the desert, darkness erases orientation. The horizon disappears, distance becomes meaningless, and the mind loses its ability to measure reality. Human fear is deeply connected to uncertainty, and nowhere does uncertainty feel more absolute than in the desert at night, where a single step forward feels identical to a step backward, where every direction looks correct and wrong at the same time, and where the idea of getting lost is no longer theoretical, but immediate and physical. This is why experienced desert travelers feared night not because of animals or enemies, But because the desert at night removes the illusion of control, sound behaves differently in the desert after sunset. With no vegetation, no buildings, no obstacles, even the smallest noise travels unnaturally far. And because the air cools rapidly at night, sound carries more clearly, making whispers feel close and distant at the same time. A single footstep might echo like movement. The wind might sound like breathing. Sand shifting might feel intentional. The desert does not attack, it suggests. This suggestion is dangerous because the human brain evolved to detect patterns, threats, and movement. And when it is deprived of reliable visual information, it begins to invent explanations for sounds it cannot confirm. That is why travelers throughout history reported hearing voices in the desert at night, seeing movement where nothing existed, or becoming convinced they were being followed, even when they were completely alone. The desert at night does not create hallucinations. It invites them. Temperature adds another layer of fear. After sunset, desert heat collapses rapidly, turning burning air into freezing cold within hours, shocking the body and exhausting the mind. While travelers already weakened by dehydration and fatigue struggle to regulate their senses. Cold makes muscles stiff. Fatigue slows thought. Dehydration distorts perception. Together, they make fear sharper and reason weaker. For caravans, night was a paradox. They traveled at night to avoid the deadly sun, but every step taken in darkness carried risk, because a missed landmark, a misjudged angle, or a mistaken star could send the entire group drifting slowly away from safety without anyone realizing it until morning. And by then, it was often too late. Many caravans that disappeared were last seen moving at night, not because night killed them directly, but because it allowed small errors to grow invisibly. The stars themselves, usually guides, could become sources of fear. The desert sky is vast, clear, and overwhelming, filled with more stars than most humans ever see in their lives. And instead of offering comfort, this infinite sky often made travelers feel small, exposed, and insignificant, as if they were standing beneath something too large to care whether they lived or died. Some travelers describe the night sky as oppressive rather than beautiful, because it reminded them that no help was coming, no city was nearby, and no boundary existed to stop the desert from continuing forever. Predators were not the main threat, but their presence was felt more intensely at night. Scorpions, snakes, insects, and nocturnal animals moved when humans could not see them, creating constant tension, forcing travelers to remain alert even when exhausted, because sleep itself became dangerous. And yet the greatest predator remained invisible, the desert itself. Psychologically, the desert at night isolates the individual completely. During the day, the sun creates a shared experience of suffering. At night, fear becomes private. Each person listens to the dark alone. Each doubt grows unchecked. Each imagined danger feels personal. This isolation explains why desert travelers often describe night as the moment when morale collapsed, when confidence dissolved, and when the will to continue quietly broke. Historical accounts repeatedly mention the same pattern. People survived the heat. They endured thirst. They carried on through exhaustion. But night weakened them, not physically, mentally.